The luminous frontier was not, by any reasonable measure, a ship that tolerated chaos. It was a gleaming monument to interstellar cooperation, a research vessel that housed 23 different species, all working in what the brochures called harmonious scientific pursuit. The brochures were lying, of course. Most days involved at least 3 diplomatic incidents, 2 food-based misunderstandings, and 1 existential argument about whether time was linear or a flat circle. But today was going to be special. It started, as most disasters do, with a routine scan. Lixmoth stood at his station on the bridge, his compound eyes reflecting the soft blue glow of his monitors. He was an imposing figure, even by the standards of the Kickstar species. 8 feet of chitinous exoskeleton, 4 arms that moved with mechanical precision, and a mind that treated regulations like most species treated oxygen. Absolutely essential for survival. His mandibles clicked in satisfaction as he reviewed the bioscan results. Everything was proceeding according to protocol, which was exactly how Lixmoth liked things to proceed. Then the screen hiccuped. It was a small thing, really. A tiny blip in the data stream. But to Lixmoth, a tiny blip was like a personal insult from the universe itself. His primary hands flew across the controls, while his secondary hands pulled up additional readouts. "Curious," he muttered, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat, emotionless standard. "Very curious." "Please tell me curious doesn't mean catastrophic," rumbled a voice from behind him. Ulpak lumbered onto the bridge, his massive frame making the automatic doors struggle with their timing. He looked like someone had taken a grizzly bear, scaled it up by 30%, given it opposable thumbs, and then handed it a security badge and several deeply rooted anger management issues. His species, the Hormak, were known throughout the galaxy as either excellent peacekeepers or terrible enemies, depending entirely on which side of their breakfast you caught them on. "Define catastrophic," Lixmoth replied, not looking away from his screen. "Oh, fantastic. It's one of those days." Ulpak moved closer, his small, dark eyes narrowing at the display. "What am I looking at?" "Life signs. Multiple. Unregistered. Unauthorized." Each word came out like a nail being hammered into a coffin. "Location. Deck 3. Personal quarters. Section H." Ulpak's ears, which were surprisingly delicate for such a massive creature, perked up. "Section H? That's the humans' quarters." "Yes." They both stood in silence for a moment, processing this information with the kind of dread usually reserved for tax audits and surprise health inspections. "How many life signs?" Ulpak asked carefully. Lixmoth's mandibles clicked in a pattern that his translator couldn't quite capture, but definitely conveyed disappointment. "At least 8. Possibly more. The readings are unusual, very small, rapid heartbeats, mammalian, if I'm reading this correctly. 8 unauthorized life forms." Ulpak's voice had dropped into what his subordinates called his "someone's about to have a terrible day" register. "On a quarantined research vessel, in a human's quarters." "Specifically," Lixmoth added, pulling up a more detailed scan, "the readings appear to be emanating from a single point source, moving with the human as he moves through the ship." Ulpak's expression, which was already not great, got substantially worse. "Moving with him?" "Indeed. Current location?" Lixmoth consulted his readout. "Mess hall. The human appears to be having breakfast." "He's having breakfast," Ulpak repeated slowly, "while carrying 8 unregistered life forms on his person." "That does appear to be the situation, yes." "And he didn't think to mention this? At any point?" During any of the mandatory bioscans we've done over the past 6 months? Lixmoth's mandibles clicked in what might have been the insectoid equivalent of a shrug. Humans are peculiar. Peculiar. Right. That's the word we're using. Ulpak reached for his communicator. Femoria, we need you on deck 3. Potential contamination scenario. The response came immediately, high-pitched and trembling. Contamination? What kind of contamination? Is it airborne? Should I seal the medical bay? How many casualties? I'm not ready for casualties before lunch. Femoria was, without question, the most talented medical officer the luminous frontier had ever employed. She was also, without question, the most anxious sentient being in 3 sectors. Her species, the Quilin, were amphibian-descended, with smooth, mottled green skin and enormous eyes that seemed perpetually on the verge of tears. She had 6 fingers on each hand, which made her surgical work exceptional and her hand-wringing absolutely Olympic level. No casualties, Ulpak said, his voice taking on the carefully measured tone of someone who'd spent considerable time talking anxious medical officers down from metaphorical ledges. Yet, we just need you to run some scans. Routine. Mostly routine. Mostly? Her voice went up another octave. What does mostly mean? It means meet us in the mess hall and bring your containment kit. Oh, stars! Oh, stars and comets! I knew today felt wrong. I should have stayed in the medical bay. I should have... Ulpak disconnected. He'd learned that Femoria's anxiety spirals could consume entire shifts if left unchecked. Shall we? Lixmoth was already moving toward the door, his 4 arms gathering various scanning devices and what looked suspiciously like a containment net. Protocol dictates immediate quarantine and investigation. If the human has introduced unauthorized biological agents onto this vessel, the consequences could be... Yeah, catastrophic. You mentioned. Ulpak fell into step beside him, one massive paw resting on the stun baton at his hip. Let's try to handle this without causing a panic, though. Last thing we need is the whole ship thinking we've got a plague situation. They found Flint exactly where the scanners said he'd be, sitting at a corner table in the mess hall, working his way through what appeared to be some kind of Earth breakfast that involved far too many carbohydrates and not enough protein for any sensible species. He was wearing, as always, that ridiculous oversized hoodie, a gray, shapeless thing that Earth humans apparently found comfortable and that everyone else found baffling. The hood was currently down, revealing messy dark hair and a face that wore the expression of someone who found the universe mildly amusing and wasn't particularly interested in explaining why. He looked up as they approached, and his grin was immediate and absolutely not reassuring. "Morning, gentlemen. And lady," he added, as Femoria scurried up behind them, clutching her medical scanner like a security blanket. "What brings the authority figures to my breakfast?" "Your pocket," Lixmoth said flatly. Flint blinked. "My pocket?" "Your pocket," Ulpak confirmed, crossing his massive arms. "More specifically, the 8 unregistered life signatures currently residing in your pocket." For a moment, Flint's expression went carefully, studiedly blank. Then, slowly, a smile crept across his face, the kind of smile that made security officers deeply, profoundly nervous. "Ah, that. Yes, that." Lixmoth's mandibles clicked with irritation. "You are aware, I presume, that bringing unauthorized biological entities onto a research vessel is a violation of approximately 19 different protocols?" "Give or take," Flint agreed cheerfully, taking another bite of his breakfast. Femoria made a sound somewhere between a squeak and a wheeze. "Are they dangerous?" Are they contagious? Do they bite? I should be wearing more protective gear. I should definitely be wearing more protective gear. They're harmless, Flint said, his voice taking on a soothing quality. Completely harmless, I promise. Forgive me if I don't take the word of someone who's been smuggling life forms in his clothing, Ulpak growled. What are they? They're... Flint paused, clearly weighing his options. His hand drifted toward his hoodie pocket in a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Look, it's complicated. Uncomplicated, Lixmoth demanded. Flint sighed, setting down his fork with an air of resignation. Can we at least do this somewhere private? I don't need the whole mess hall knowing my business. Ulpak glanced around. Sure enough, several crew members from various species had stopped eating to watch the confrontation with undisguised interest. Nothing spread faster on a starship than gossip, except maybe actual biological contaminants, which was exactly what everyone was probably thinking this was. Medical bay, Ulpak decided. Now. Fine, fine. Flint stood, gathering his tray. His hand stayed protectively over his pocket, which, now that they were looking, did seem slightly fuller than a pocket should be. And was that movement? But, for the record, you're all overreacting. We detected 8 unknown heartbeats coming from your person, Lixmoth said as they began walking, forming a not particularly subtle escort around the human. I don't believe overreacting adequately describes appropriate concern. 8 tiny heartbeats, Flint corrected. There's a difference. Not one that makes me feel better, Fimoria whispered, her medical scanner already out and running preliminary readings. Her eyes went wide, wider than usual, which was saying something. Oh, stars and nebulas. The readings they're definitely mammalian, definitely alive, definitely multiple distinct organisms. Heart rates are incredibly elevated. Stress response? Or natural state? I can't tell. I need better equipment. You need to breathe, Flint said gently. Deep breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Or, however your species does it. Don't tell the medical officer how to breathe while you're carrying unknown biological entities, Ulpak snapped. But his tone had shifted slightly. Flint had that effect on people, an annoying ability to remain calm in situations that should definitely not inspire calmness. The walk to the medical bay felt longer than it was. Crew members stopped in corridors to stare. Whispers followed in their wake. By the time they reached Fimoria's domain, a gleaming space filled with equipment designed for 24 different biological configurations. Half the ship probably knew something was happening. Fimoria immediately began setting up scanners, her 6 fingers flying across controls. Okay. Containment field is ready. Decontamination protocols standing by. If whatever is in your pocket is hostile, we can neutralize it in approximately 0.3 seconds. If it's toxic, we can... It's not hostile, Flint interrupted, his hand still resting protectively over his pocket. And it's not toxic. I've been living with them for months. Months? Lixmoth repeated, his voice flat with disbelief. You've been harboring unauthorized life forms for months. I prefer caring for. But sure, harboring works. Ulpak stepped forward, his massive frame somehow making the spacious medical bay feel cramped. Flint, I'm going to give you one chance to voluntarily show us what's in your pocket. One chance. After that, I'm authorized to use whatever means necessary to ensure the safety of this vessel and crew. Flint looked up at him, which required looking considerably up, given the height difference, and his expression was thoughtful. You know what? Fair. But I need you all to promise something first. You're not in a position to negotiate, Lixmoth pointed out. Promise, Flint continued as if he hadn't spoken, that you won't freak out. No sudden movements, no loud noises, and absolutely no threatening gestures. His eyes moved to Ulpak's hand, which was resting on his stun baton. That means you, big guy. Ulpak's jaw clenched, but he moved his hand away from the weapon. Fine. No threatening gestures. Now show us. Flint took a deep breath. His hand moved to his pocket, that ridiculous, oversized hoodie pocket that apparently contained a minor biological mystery. Okay, but remember, you promised. He reached inside. Fimoria's scanner went absolutely haywire, chirping and beeping like it was having some kind of electronic seizure. Lixmoth's mandibles clicked rapidly, preparing for, well, none of them were quite sure what they were preparing for. Ulpak tensed, every muscle in his considerable frame coiled and ready, and Flint, with the casual air of someone revealing nothing more interesting than loose change, slowly withdrew his hand. In his palm sat a creature roughly the size of a human fist. It had brown and white fur, tiny pink paws, and round black eyes that looked up at them with the kind of innocent curiosity usually reserved for creatures that had no natural predators and didn't understand they probably should be more careful about that. It squeaked. The sound was high-pitched, brief, and utterly non-threatening. It was possibly the least intimidating noise any of them had ever heard from a living creature. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound in the medical bay was the continued electronic panic of Fimoria's scanner and the tiny, contented squeaking of the creature in Flint's hand. Then Fimoria screamed. The scream that came out of Fimoria was the kind of sound that suggested imminent death, catastrophic hull breach, or possibly both. It echoed through the medical bay with enough force to trigger 3 separate emergency alarms, which began wailing in sympathetic harmony. The creature in Flint's hand squeaked again, louder this time, clearly startled by the noise. "Fimoria!" Ulpak barked, slapping the alarm panel to silence the klaxons. "It's tiny! It has teeth!" Fimoria had backed herself against the far wall, her scanner held out like a shield. "I can see them. Little tiny teeth. What if it bites? What if it carries diseases? What if—" "It's a hamster," Flint said, his voice carrying the patience of someone who'd had this conversation before. "They don't bite. Well, they rarely bite. Okay, Nugget bit me once, but I'm pretty sure that was an accident." "Nugget?" Lixmoth's mandibles had frozen mid-click. His compound eyes were fixed on the small creature with the kind of intensity usually reserved for examining potentially explosive substances. "You've named it?" "Him. Nugget's a him." Flint gently stroked the hamster's head with one finger. Nugget responded by grooming his tiny paws, completely unconcerned with the existential crisis he was causing. "And, yeah, I've named all of them." Ulpak's brain, which had been doing its absolute best to process the situation, finally caught up with that last part. All of them. "Right, yeah." Flint's other hand went back to his pocket. "Did I not mention? There are 8. "Do not!" Fimoria squeaked from her corner. "Do not take out more of them!" But Flint was already reaching in, and out came another hamster. This one golden-colored, and somehow even fluffier than the first. It sat up on its haunches in his palm, whiskers twitching as it surveyed the room with what could only be described as magnificent indifference to the panic it was causing. "This is Pumpkin," Flint announced. "She's the troublemaker of the bunch." Lixmoth made a sound his translator couldn't begin to interpret. His 4 arms had gone rigid, 2 still holding scanning equipment and 2 hanging uselessly at his sides. "You brought 8 of these hamsters," Flint supplied helpfully. 8 rodents onto a research vessel? Lixmoth's voice had risen to a pitch that suggested his carefully maintained composure was developing stress fractures. Do you have any concept of the contamination protocols you've violated? The quarantine procedures you've ignored? The sheer, overwhelming regulations you've— They're clean, Flint interrupted, his tone shifting from amused to something more defensive. I've been monitoring their health. They're healthy, happy, and completely harmless. Your medical qualifications are? Fimoria asked from her corner, her voice shaking. Extensive Googling and 6 months of hands-on experience. Fimoria made a sound like she was dying. Ulpak stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over Flint and the 2 hamsters. His voice had dropped to that dangerous, quiet register that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. Flint, I'm going to ask you this once, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Why, and I cannot stress this enough, why do you have 8 rodents in your pocket? Flint met his gaze without flinching. Because they're my emotional support animals. The silence that followed was the kind that usually precedes explosions, either literal or metaphorical. You're what? Lixmoth said flatly. Emotional support animals. It's a human thing. We keep small creatures as companions. They provide comfort, reduce stress, give us something to care for. Flint was speaking slowly now, like he was explaining a complex concept to particularly slow students. Surely you've heard of pets? Pets, Ulpak repeated. The word sounded wrong in his mouth, like he was speaking a language that didn't quite fit his vocal structure. You mean animals you don't eat? Correct. And don't use for labor? Also correct. And serve no practical purpose whatsoever? Well, I wouldn't say no purpose. What purpose? Lixmoth's mandibles were clicking so rapidly they sounded like castanets. What possible purpose could 8 tiny mammals serve on a research vessel? Flint's expression softened. He looked down at Nugget and Pumpkin, both now grooming themselves in his palms with complete unconcern for the debate raging around them. They make me happy. That's the purpose. Fimoria had finally worked up the courage to approach, though she kept a solid 3 feet of distance. Her scanner was still out, still beeping with frantic readings. The biological readings are, actually, they're remarkable. Heart rate is naturally elevated. Body temperature approximately 38 degrees. Metabolic rate is extraordinarily high. They'd need to eat constantly to maintain that. Every few hours, Flint confirmed, which is why I keep food in my other pocket. Your other pocket has food? Fimoria's eyes somehow got wider. Do you have any idea what kind of bacterial growth could— Sealed container, cleaned daily. I'm not an idiot. That, Ulpak said heavily, is currently up for debate. Lixmoth had moved closer, his scientific curiosity apparently overriding his sense of protocol violation. 2 of his eyes remained fixed on the hamsters, while the other clusters scanned the readouts from Fimoria's equipment. The scans show 8 distinct organisms, but I'm only seeing 2. Where are the others? Still in the pocket. They're probably sleeping. Hamsters are nocturnal mostly. They sleep during ship's day cycle. Flint glanced down at his hoodie. Though I think you guys woke them up with all the yelling. As if on cue, the pocket began to move. Not just move, squirm. Bulges appeared and disappeared in the fabric like something out of a horror vid, except somehow less terrifying and more absurd. They're escaping, Fimoria whispered. Oh, stars, they're escaping. They're going to get loose in the medical bay. They could get into the ventilation. They could— Relax, Flint said. setting Nugget and Pumpkin on the medical examination table. Both hamsters immediately began exploring, tiny paws pattering across the sterile surface. They're not escaping. They're just waking up. His hand dove back into the pocket, which seemed to have impossible depth, like some kind of dimensional anomaly designed specifically for rodent storage, and came out with a third hamster. This one was white with red eyes, smaller than the others. Mochi, Flint introduced. She's the shy one. Then a fourth, gray with a white belly. Biscuit. Fifth, black and white, spotted. Tater Tot. Sixth, brown with a distinctive white patch. Beans. Stop, Lixmoth said weakly. Please stop. Flint pulled out the last two. Muffin and Pudding. The twins. Well, not actual twins, but they do everything together, so... The examination table now held 8 hamsters in various states of wakefulness. Some were grooming, some were exploring. Pudding had discovered a supply cabinet handle and was attempting to climb it with single-minded determination. Tater Tot was sniffing Ulpak's massive paw, where it rested on the table's edge, whiskers twitching with interest. "This is impossible," Liximoth said, though his voice had lost its sharp edge. He was staring at the hamsters with something approaching wonder. "Your species keeps these creatures for no practical reason?" "For company," Flint corrected. "Humans have kept pets for thousands of years. Dogs, cats, birds, fish, hamsters. We like having other living things around. We form bonds with them." "Bonds," Ulpak rumbled. He was also staring at the hamsters now, his small dark eyes tracking their movements. "With rodents. With animals, yeah. Is that really so strange?" "Yes," all 3 aliens said simultaneously. Flint shrugged. "Well, it's normal for us. And before you ask, yes, I knew they weren't on the approved species list. Yes, I knew I was breaking protocol. But I couldn't leave them behind when I signed on for this mission, and I figured what you didn't know wouldn't hurt you." "Until our sensors detected 8 unauthorized heartbeats," Lixmoth pointed out. "Yeah, that was unfortunate timing." Fimoria had crept closer, her scanner still active but her posture less panicked. She was watching Mochi, who had curled up into a tiny ball and appeared to be falling back asleep. They're kind of cute," Flint supplied. "I was going to say biologically fascinating. But yes, I suppose cute is also accurate." She glanced at her readings. "Their stress hormones are remarkably low given the situation. Either they're too simple to understand danger or they trust me," Flint said quietly. "We've been together for months. They know I won't let anything hurt them." Ulpak made a sound deep in his chest, something between a grunt and a growl. "This is still a massive protocol violation. 8 unregistered life forms, unauthorized biological entities, potential contamination risks." He was interrupted by a tiny squeak. Tater Tot had climbed onto his paw and was now sitting there, tiny pink hands gripping his fur, looking up at him with those ridiculous black eyes. Ulpak froze. His entire massive body went absolutely still, like he'd been turned to stone. "It's on me." "She," Flint corrected. "Tater Tot's a she." She is on my paw." "Yeah, she likes you. Congratulations." "What do I do?" "Nothing. Just let her sit there. She's comfortable." For a long moment, the head of security for the Luminous Frontier, a battle-hardened Hormak who'd faced down hostile boardings, pirate raids, and one memorable incident with a malfunctioning food processor, stood completely paralyzed by a creature that weighed approximately 40 grams. Then, very slowly, something changed in his expression. His ears twitched forward. His eyes softened just slightly. "She's warm," he said, his voice uncertain. Mammals usually are, Flint agreed, trying and failing to hide his smile. Lixmoth's mandibles clicked, in what might have been exasperation, but he was watching Beans waddle across the table toward his scanning equipment with undisguised interest. This is ridiculous. We're security and science officers, not pet sitters, Flint offered. This entire situation is a disaster waiting to happen. As if the universe had been waiting for exactly that cue, Pumpkin, who Flint had specifically identified as the troublemaker, made a break for it. The golden hamster launched herself off the edge of the examination table in a feat of either extraordinary courage or extraordinary stupidity, landing on the floor with a tiny thump and immediately scrambling toward the door at a speed that seemed physically impossible for something with such short legs. "Pumpkin!" Flint lunged. "Containment breach!" Phimoria shrieked. And just like that, the situation went from bad to absolutely chaotic. The thing about hamsters, Flint thought as he dove across the medical bay floor, is that they're approximately 60% fluff, 30% audacity, and 10% pure chaos. Pumpkin embodied all three categories with exceptional enthusiasm. "Close the door!" Lixmoth shouted, but it was too late. Pumpkin had already squeezed through the gap with the liquid efficiency of a creature that had evolved specifically to fit through impossible spaces. The medical bay doors whooshed shut behind her, leaving one very determined hamster loose in the corridors of the luminous frontier. "This is fine," Flint said, scrambling to his feet. "This is totally fine. She'll tire out eventually." Eventually? Ulpak carefully placed Tater-Tot back on the examination table with remarkable gentleness for someone who looked like he could crush a cargo container, and moved toward the door. "How long is eventually?" "Could be minutes, could be hours. Hamsters have terrible depth perception, but excellent stamina." "Hours," Phimoria repeated faintly. She looked down at the remaining hamsters on the table. Pudding had successfully climbed the cabinet handle and was now attempting to squeeze into a gap that was definitely too small for even a determined rodent. "Are the others going to do this too?" "Probably not. Pumpkin's special." "Special," Lixmoth said, his mandibles clicking with barely controlled frustration, "is not a quality I appreciate in unauthorized biological entities." Ulpak hit his communicator. "Security, we have a situation. Small mammalian life form, approximately 10 centimeters long, golden-colored, potentially located anywhere on Deck 3. Consider it a priority capture. Non-lethal methods only." There was a pause. Then, "Sir, did you say mammalian? What kind of mammalian?" "The small kind. Just find it." "Sir, respectfully, you're going to need to be more specific. Just find the fuzzy thing." Ulpak disconnected, his ears flat against his skull. "This is a nightmare." "It's really not," Flint said, though he was already heading for the door. "Look, I'll find her. I've done this before. Hamsters are escape artists, but they're also predictable. She'll head somewhere warm and dark. Probably. The ventilation access on this deck." The ship-wide intercom crackled to life. "Attention, all personnel. This is Captain Colmus. We have reports of an unidentified creature loose on Deck 3. All non-essential crew are advised to remain in their quarters until further notice. Essential personnel should report any sightings immediately. The creature is described as small, fast, and—" There was a pause, as if the captain was reading from notes he didn't quite believe. "Fluffy. Colmus out." Flint winced. "Well, that's going to cause a panic." "Going to?" Phimoria's voice had climbed back into the upper registers. "The entire ship now thinks we have some kind of dangerous organism running through the corridors. I mean, dangerous is a strong word." The medical bay doors opened again, and a young luminar, a species that resembled Earth's dolphins if dolphins had grown legs and developed a concerning addiction to technical manuals, practically fell through the entrance. Their name was something unpronounceable in Standard, so everyone called them Tech. Dr. Femoria! I was in the corridor, and something small and furry ran across my foot, and I think I'm having a cardiac event. You don't have a heart, Femoria said automatically, already scanning them. Your species has a distributed circulatory system. Then I'm having multiple cardiac events. Did you see which way it went? Flint asked urgently. Tech pointed a trembling appendage toward the ceiling. Up. It went up, into the ventilation grate, which should be impossible because the grates have safety screens, but apparently this creature defies the laws of physics. That's just Pumpkin showing off, Flint muttered, already pulling up a schematic of the ventilation system on his personal device. Okay, if she went into the vents here, she could come out, pretty much anywhere on this deck. Fantastic. Lixmoth had moved to his own console, his 4 arms working multiple screens simultaneously. I'm activating internal sensors to track movement in the ventilation system. If your creature is in there, we'll... He stopped, mandibles freezing mid-click. Oh no. What oh no? Ulpak demanded. I hate oh no. She's not alone in there. Flint looked up sharply. What do you mean she's not alone? Lixmoth turned his screen so they could all see. The ventilation schematic was lit up with movement indicators, small, rapid signatures moving through the ductwork like tiny furry missiles. There are multiple heat signatures, at least 5, possibly 6 distinct entities. Flint's hand went to his hoodie pocket, which suddenly felt much lighter than it should. He looked at the examination table, counting quickly. Nugget, mochi, biscuit. Oh no. You don't get to oh no, Ulpak growled. That's our thing. Where are the rest of them? In my defense, Flint said weakly, I was distracted by the whole pumpkin escape situation. How many are missing? Flint counted again, hoping the numbers would somehow change. They didn't. 5. Beans, muffin, pudding, tater tot, and obviously pumpkin. 5, Femoria wheezed. 5 rodents are now loose in our ventilation system. They prefer to travel in groups, Flint offered. It's a social bonding thing. I'm going to social bond your head to a bulkhead, Ulpak snarled, but he was already moving, pulling up building schematics on his communicator. If they're in the ventilation system, they could get anywhere. Engineering, life support, the bridge. His communicator chirped. Ulpak, this is engineering. We've got something in the plasma relay chamber. It's small and making squeaking noises, and I'm pretty sure it's not supposed to be here. Do not touch it, Ulpak ordered. We're on our way. Another chirp. Security Chief, this is navigation. There's a creature sitting on the star chart display. I think it's grooming itself. Should I be concerned? Yes, Ulpak said flatly. You should be very concerned. A third chirp. Ulpak? Mess hall? One of your fuzzy things just stole a piece of toast off someone's plate, and the Kilmoran chef is threatening to cook it. Please advise. Flint grabbed his arm, or tried to. His hand didn't quite reach all the way around. Don't let him cook them. They're friendly. They don't understand property rights. Nobody on this ship understands your rodent's legal status, Lixmoth snapped. But he was also moving now, gathering equipment with frantic efficiency. We need containment units, portable scanners, and possibly a miracle. I'll take the plasma relay, Ulpak decided. Lixmoth, you handle navigation. Flint, you're with me. You can identify which one we're catching. What about me? Femoria asked, still clutching her scanner like a lifeline. You, Ulpak said grimly. Watch the remaining hamsters. Do not let them escape. Fumoria looked at the examination table, where Nugget, Mochi, and Biscuit were observing the chaos with the serene indifference of creatures who had absolutely no idea they were causing an interstellar incident. Right. Yes, I can do that. Probably. The next hour was, by any objective measure, absolute pandemonium. Engineering reported that Beans had somehow gotten into the plasma relay chamber and was now nesting in a bundle of thermal cables, which should have been impossible because the temperature in there should have been lethal to organic life. When they finally coaxed her out, using a trail of the hamster food from Flint's pocket, they discovered she'd chewed through 3 non-essential cables and one that was arguably essential, but the ship could probably function without. Navigation found Muffin sitting on the star chart display, her tiny paws leaving prints across 3 different solar systems. She'd also somehow activated the zoom function and had been spinning the display with apparent delight, which explained why navigation had been showing a course that would take them directly into a nebula. The mess hall incident turned out to be Pudding, who had indeed stolen toast and was now being cornered by an irate Kilmoran chef who kept shouting about health violations and the sanctity of the breakfast buffer. Flint arrived just in time to prevent what would have been the galaxy's most lopsided culinary battle. But it was Tater Tot's location that caused the most concern. She'd made it all the way to the bridge, somehow squeezing through 3 secured doors in the process, and was discovered sitting on Captain Colmus's command console, looking up at him with those impossibly innocent eyes. The captain, to his credit, hadn't panicked. The Ixtar species were known for their calm under pressure, their wisdom, and their 12 tentacles that allowed them to multitask with terrifying efficiency. Colmus simply sat in his chair, staring at the tiny mammal with the expression of someone who'd thought he'd seen everything the universe had to offer and was now being corrected. "So," he said slowly, his translator rendering his gurgling speech into perfect standard, "this is the source of our biosecurity breach." "Yes, sir," Ulpak confirmed, arriving on the bridge slightly out of breath. "This is Tater Tot. She's a hamster. She's harmless." "Harmless," Colmus repeated. One of his tentacles reached out, carefully, and gently touched Tater Tot's head. The hamster squeaked and pushed into the touch, apparently interpreting a tentacle as just another weird finger. "It's soft. They're mammals, sir. Fur is kind of their thing." Colmus was silent for a long moment, his large eyes fixed on the tiny creature. Then, "How many of these are on my ship?" "8 total, sir. We've recovered 6. Still looking for 2. "8. Another tentacle joined the first, both now gently stroking the hamster who seemed entirely unbothered by the fact that she was being petted by an alien species. "And they belong to—" "Flint, sir. The human xenobiologist." "Ah, yes. Flint. The one who filed a report last month suggesting we were taking life too seriously and should learn to appreciate the little things." Colmus's translator somehow managed to convey irony. "I'm beginning to understand what he meant." Tater Tot chose that moment to yawn, a tiny, squeaking yawn that showed miniature teeth and a pink tongue, and then curled up in a ball on the console, apparently deciding that the captain's chair was an excellent place for a nap. "Sir," Ulpak said carefully, "what are your orders?" Colmus was quiet for a long moment. His tentacles continued their gentle motion, stroking the sleeping hamster with a tenderness that seemed at odds with his position as commander of a research vessel. "Find the other 2. Bring all 8 to the briefing room, along with Flint. And someone please tell the crew that the dangerous organism is approximately 40 grams and prefers sunflower seeds. I suspect we're causing unnecessary panic. Yes, sir. As deed Idus Ulpak left the bridge, he heard the captain say softly, "Remarkable little things, aren't they?" He found himself agreeing. They found Pumpkin 20 minutes later, curled up in a heating vent near the hydroponics bay, sleeping off her grand adventure with the satisfaction of a creature who'd successfully traumatized an entire starship. The final hamster, who turned out to be the ever-shy Mochi, was located in the laundry processing unit, nested in a pile of clean towels and looking remarkably pleased with herself. The briefing room had never held a stranger assembly. Captain Colmus sat at the head of the table, his tentacles arranged in what Flint had learned was his thoughtful configuration. Lixmoth occupied one side, his forearms folded in a way that suggested he was still processing the day's events. Ulpak loomed on the other side, looking like he wanted to be angry but couldn't quite manage it. Fimoria sat clutched to her chair, eyes darting between the hamsters and her medical scanner. And in the middle of the table, in a hastily assembled containment unit that Lixmoth had designed in approximately 15 minutes, which was really just a clear plastic container with air holes and a water bottle, were all 8 hamsters. They were doing what hamsters did best. Absolutely nothing of consequence. Nugget was running on a makeshift wheel. Pumpkin was sleeping. The others were scattered in various states of grooming, eating, or staring into space, with the blank expression of creatures whose thoughts, if they existed at all, were magnificently simple. "So," Captain Colmus began, his voice carrying the weight of command mixed with what might have been amusement. "Flint, would you care to explain why you smuggled 8 rodents onto my ship?" Flint, still wearing his oversized hoodie, now significantly emptier, met the captain's gaze. "Because leaving them behind wasn't an option, sir. And because I knew if I asked permission, the answer would be no." "You were correct on that second point," Colmus confirmed. "The regulations regarding biological entities on research vessels are quite clear. With respect, sir, the regulations were written by species who don't have pets. They don't account for emotional attachment." "Emotional attachment?" Lixmoth interjected, his mandibles clicking. "To creatures that serve no functional purpose." "That's where you're wrong," Flint said quietly. He looked at the hamsters, and his expression softened in a way that made even Ulpak's ears twitch. "They serve a huge purpose, just not one that fits on a regulation form." "Explain," Colmus ordered, though his tone was curious rather than harsh. Flint took a breath. "Humans get lonely. We're social creatures, and even when we're surrounded by people, or in this case multiple species, we need something more. Something that doesn't judge us, doesn't expect anything from us, except food and warmth. These little guys, they're happy to see me when I wake up. They don't care if I had a bad day or made mistakes in the lab. They just exist. And that existence makes mine better." The room was quiet. Even the hamsters seemed to pause in their activities, though that was probably coincidence. "Throughout this mission," Flint continued, "I've dealt with communication barriers, cultural misunderstandings, homesickness that felt like a physical ache. And every night, I'd go back to my quarters, and these 8 ridiculous creatures would be there, squeaking at me, demanding treats, running on their wheel at 3 in the morning. And it helped. It made a ship full of aliens feel a little more like home." Fimoria's voice was soft when she spoke. That's rather beautiful." "It's a violation of protocol," Lixmoth countered, but his voice lacked its earlier sharpness. "It is," Colmus agreed. "However, I find myself in an unusual position. In the past 3 hours, these creatures have caused chaos throughout my ship. They've disrupted operations, violated containment procedures, and given my chief of security what I suspect is his first genuine anxiety attack. Ulpak grunted, but didn't deny it. And yet, Kolmis continued, one tentacle gesturing toward the container, in that same time period, I've observed something interesting. Engineer Polmex, who reported the plasma relay incident, mentioned that watching the hamster, Beans, was it, actually calmed his nerves during the extraction. The navigation team found their stress levels dropping while observing Muffin. And I, myself. He paused, his large eyes reflecting the soft light of the briefing room. I found the experience of interacting with Tater Tot to be remarkably pleasant, centering, even. Flint's eyebrows rose. Sir? Your species isn't the only one that experiences stress, Flint. Command is lonely. Decision-making is exhausting. And perhaps... He looked at the hamsters again, watching as Pudding attempted to stuff an entire piece of food into her cheek pouch. Perhaps there's wisdom in your people's practice of keeping creatures whose only purpose is to simply be. Lixmoth's mandibles clicked in what might have been protest. Captain, the regulations will be amended, Kolmis said firmly. I'm authorizing a new classification, Emotional Support Fauna, Human Standard. These 8 creatures will be officially registered with the ship's biological database. Lixmoth, you'll design proper housing that meets both their needs and our safety protocols. What? Lixmoth's compound eyes blinked in asynchronous confusion. You heard me? I saw the containment unit you built. It took you 15 minutes, and it's already better than half the equipment we have in storage. Make it permanent. But, sir? That's an order, Science Officer. Lixmoth's mandibles clicked in a pattern that suggested resignation mixed with something that might have been curiosity. Yes, sir. Though I'll need detailed information about their biological requirements. Diet, temperature preferences, social needs. I can help with that, Flint said quickly, trying not to grin. Ulpak leaned forward, his massive paws flat on the table. And security protocols? If they escape again, then we'll catch them again, Kolmis said simply. Life aboard a research vessel is unpredictable. I suspect 8 small mammals will be among the least of our concerns. He looked at Flint. Though I expect you to take responsibility for their care and containment. Absolutely, sir. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You'll be filing weekly reports on their health and behavior. And if they cause another ship-wide incident, we're having a very different conversation. Understood. Fimoria, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. Captain, if I may, I'd like to be involved in monitoring their health. For medical research purposes, of course. To understand mammalian stress responses and emotional regulation. Of course, Holmes said, his translator conveying what was definitely amusement now. Purely for research. Purely, Fimoria agreed, though her eyes were fixed on Pudding with unmistakable fondness. The meeting concluded shortly after, with orders given and protocols established. As the crew filed out, Ulpak lingered near the container. Tater Tot had pressed herself against the clear wall closest to him, tiny paws against the plastic. They're ridiculous, he muttered. Completely, Flint agreed. No practical value whatsoever. None at all. And yet, Ulpak's voice trailed off. His massive paw moved close to the container, and Tater Tot seemed to reach toward it, whiskers twitching. And yet, Flint finished softly. 2 weeks later, the Luminous Frontier featured a new addition to its recreational deck, a climate-controlled habitat module that Lixmoth had designed with what he insisted was purely functional attention to detail. It featured multiple levels, tunnels, wheels, and viewing windows that allowed crew members to observe the hamsters during their off hours. It became the most popular location on the ship. Officers would stop by during breaks, watching the hamsters with the kind of fascination usually reserved for distant nebulae or first-contact scenarios. The creatures that had caused such chaos had become, somehow, a source of calm. Flint stood in front of the habitat late one evening, watching Pumpkin attempt to fit 3 times her body weight in food into her cheeks. His hoodie pocket was empty now, but he didn't mind. The hamsters had a proper home, and more importantly, they'd given the crew something unexpected. Behind him, the door opened. Ulpak entered, looking slightly embarrassed to be caught visiting the habitat outside of duty hours. "Evening," Flint said, without turning. "Evening," Ulpak rumbled. He moved to stand beside the human, his massive frame somehow gentle in the soft light. "Just doing a security check." "Sure you are." They stood in companionable silence, watching the hamsters go about their simple lives. "You know," Ulpak said eventually, "my species doesn't have a word for pet." "No?" "No. We have words for prey, predator, livestock, vermin, but nothing for what these are." "What are they?" Flint asked. Ulpak was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Friends, I suppose. Strange, tiny, impractical friends." Flint smiled. "Yeah, that's exactly what they are." In the habitat, 8 hamsters continued their nightly routines, blissfully unaware that they'd fundamentally changed how an entire starship crew thought about purpose, companionship, and the value of things that served no function except to exist. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything.